Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to NCARB Live. Today, we're going to be talking about the upcoming migration from Prometric to PSI. I'm Jenny Kowecki, and I'm joined today by two of NCARB's examination experts. Jared and Michelle, why don't you briefly introduce yourselves, your role, and what you're most looking forward to sharing with our viewers today? Jared, we'll start with you.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Jared Zurn. I'm the Vice President of Examination here at NCARB. I myself am a licensed architect, earned my license to practice back in the great state of Minnesota, and I've been working with NCARB now for 13 years on various aspects related to the examination. And I guess, Jenny, what I'm most looking forward to sharing today is we have a lot of information to talk about. We know that things are changing as we go to PSI, but we want to help you understand that the changes that are taking place are for the better, and what they're really going to do is they're not going to disrupt how you're preparing to take the ARE.
Thanks. And Michelle?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Cohn, and I am Assistant Vice President of Examination here at NCARB. I'm also an architect. I am licensed here in Washington, D.C., and I have been with NCARB on the examination team for about 7 years now. I'd say what I'm looking forward to most, I'll piggyback off of what Jared said, where there are going to be some changes, and we're going to talk about those today. We are looking forward to just giving that information to our candidates so that they can be most prepared for what's coming and really feel confident about continuing with their testing.
Great. Well, thank you both for being here today. Jared and Michelle are going to be answering your questions today, as well as providing some key information about PSI test center locations, what you can expect from the migration, and how you can help pilot test the migration to PSI. So viewers, you can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A tool on your screen. But we do recommend that maybe you wait until after this brief introductory presentation because it might answer some of your basic questions. And to help us answer as many questions as possible, please only submit each of your questions once using the Q&A tool. If we don't have time to answer your question today, please feel free to contact NCARB on our website, over the phone, or on the online community. And if you need to sign off early, you can watch a recording of the full webinar later on our blog or our YouTube channel. Now, Jared and Michelle, why don't you start us off with some key info about the upcoming switch to PSI?
Great. Well, thank you, Jenny. And as Jenny has said, Michelle and I put together a small presentation. It's like 7 slides, just to give you the overview of all the different things that we know are important to you as candidates. And then we want to make sure we answer your other outstanding questions at the end. And so we're going to start with timeline, because everybody wants to know what the timeline is really going to be. And to date, you've seen a graphic that looks like this in your ARE update. And we'll talk you through a little more detail about what each of these sections are about. So it was back in the spring of 2021 that we really publicly started talking about the fact that we are making the migration from our current test site vendor to PSI. And throughout the spring and summer, we've been doing development work. And that's why the timeline has taken so long, is because it wasn't as simple as just turn off with one and turn on with another, but there really is systems improvements that we're working on to make your experience better. And that takes time. And so that's what we spent the spring and late summer doing. So Michelle, take it away.
Yeah, so that brings us to late summer, and I'd say here in mid-September, we are definitely at the tail end of summer 2021. So what's happening right now is this NCARB Live. You're going to start to see more blogs going out on our website, ARE updates that everyone is used to seeing in their email inboxes. So we're really getting this information out there. You might not see everything you want to see all at once. It's going to be over the next several months, really providing you a lot of information so you can, as it says here, learn more about PSI and just, again, feel confident about what's coming down the pike for your testing.
So the fall, which for us is now 2 weeks away, the fall's a big time in this project, and it's good for you to understand that. We at NCARB have been doing this development work, and we're finalizing it right now, and we're going into what we call user acceptance testing. And the month of October for us is really important. We're going to test all of the systems end to end to make sure that what we're developing is providing the experience that we want for you as a candidate. And this is honestly part of the reason that we can't give you a final launch date today, because we want to make sure the systems are working, that they're in good shape, and then we're going to commit to a launch date 3 months after we've made that confirmation. So what I will tell you is the month of October is booked for Michelle and I and many, many, many other people here at NCARB, as we are going to be testing the system front to back to front, every different way to make sure that we're comfortable and confident in what it's doing. And then we plan on releasing the official launch date in that very late October or early November timeframe.
Okay, so that brings us into late 2021. What happens next? So we have here candidates are going to begin migrating and scheduling tests with PSI. So Jared mentioned we're going to announce that launch date 3 months ahead of when the first testing will happen with PSI. Now, about 2 months before testing begins with PSI, we're going to open up the opportunity for candidates to self-migrate their eligibilities. And what that means is candidates, all candidates today testing with our current test vendor will have this opportunity to say, I am ready to make the move to PSI. I want to be a PSI candidate. You won't be able to start testing yet with PSI, but you'll be able to decide that you want to be a PSI candidate, and you'll even be able to start scheduling your exams with PSI so that you're ready to go once the testing functionality is turned on. Now, the other thing that's going to be happening in that late 2021 timeframe is an operational pilot testing period. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later on, but what that means is we're going to, it's really an add-on to all of the systems testing that Jared mentioned for October. So in the late 2021 timeframe is the candidate's turn to be part of that testing. That will be your opportunity to take a real exam in the PSI test center or online with PSI and give us feedback on what you're seeing and give us another opportunity to address any issues that may arise that we might have missed in our internal testing.
And then early 2022 is how we've been talking about when we are launching with PSI, and we will end delivery with Prometric. So right now, as a candidate, you can schedule an appointment with Prometric up through the end of January. Any appointment you make with Prometric is your appointment with Prometric. You cannot migrate an appointment from Prometric to PSI. So if you schedule with Prometric, you're committed to testing with Prometric. What's going to happen is realistically, we've kind of laid out the timeline for you. It's going to be that late October, early November that we're going to say, here's your minimum of a 3-month notice of launch, which I can guarantee the earliest possible day we would ever be delivering with PSI is going to be sometime in early February, because that gives you that 3-month notice. Depending on how things look after the user acceptance testing, we may come out and say, you know what, we're going to wait, we're going to launch in late February. It might even be March. I will tell you, Prometric's committed to supporting you as a candidate and supporting NCARB, and that if we need to open up the scheduler for the month of February with Prometric, we'll be able to do that. So we're not going to stop your ability to keep testing as we're going through this migration process.
All right, so let's jump right into testing with PSI. When candidates are able to do that, we know we've seen a lot of questions about test centers. Right now, about 70% or so of our candidates are testing in physical test centers, about 30% online, but we know that the majority of you are testing in a test center. So what's that going to look like with PSI? Well, we can confirm PSI has more test centers than what you're used to seeing right now. And test centers, just as we have right now, are in every NCARB jurisdiction. So that's all 50 states plus DC, Guam, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, and the Northern Mariana Islands. So wherever you are in the US or one of the territories, you'll be able to take the ARE. Now, when we say more test centers, I want to just go back to that for just a moment. One great thing about PSI's test center network is that the test centers tend to be more spread out within each of our jurisdictions. So rather than having a few larger test centers kind of centrally located, with PSI, you're going to find more test centers just kind of scattered throughout your state. And so what that means is some candidates might need to travel farther, but there's going to be a lot of candidates who are actually going to reduce their travel time to a test center. So we're hoping that that's going to be a big advantage for a lot of our candidates once we open up that testing with PSI.
And over the last several years, we've provided candidates the opportunity to test internationally at test centers. And that opportunity is going to continue with PSI. So if you're overseas, you happen to be watching this webinar right now, very late at your night or very early in your morning, or you watch it recorded, what we're doing right now is we're actually analyzing where our candidates have been testing in the various Prometric international locations to ensure that we have good coverage for those same candidates as we move to PSI. I will tell you the PSI test center check-in process is going to be quite similar. So now we're going to talk about that either testing online or testing on site. You're still going to go through a check-in process, right? This is a secure exam. You expect that. We're going to share more details about the specifics around that. And you may have already watched the video in our latest ARE update. PSI has put together a web page for ARE candidates. And you can go watch videos on what it's like in a PSI test center or what it's like using PSI's online application. We're several months away from doing this yet, but we're starting to put the information out there if you want to get an early start in understanding what's going to happen. Also, online testing will continue, as we've said, with PSI. So if you've taken advantage of online testing with Prometric, you're going to be able to take advantage of online testing with PSI. And if you haven't taken advantage of online testing with Prometric, you may want to take advantage of online testing with PSI.
So we want to share with you some improvements that you're going to see once we migrate to PSI. And the first one on the list here is enhancements to the demo exam. So hopefully everyone here has tried that out. Through your NCARB record, you can access a full-length demo exam and really get a sense for that, the look and feel of what you'll experience during your actual exam. We're actually going to be rolling out some improvements to that demo exam, which are going to allow you to actually see how you're doing on each of those items. You no longer have to kind of check yourself by looking at that handbook. You'll be able to get that information while you're taking the demo exam or in a score report after you complete your demo exam. So you'll better be able to track your progress and your growth as you're taking that exam. We're also going to be introducing a streamlined scheduling process. So right now, when you go to schedule your exam, you start off on NCARB site, and then you are redirected to a Prometric site to schedule your exam. Moving forward with PSI, that's all going to be within the NCARB site. So that's going to represent some advantages to candidates. We've also been able to update that scheduling page. So now it's going to be mobile friendly. If you're someone who would prefer to just take care of your scheduling on the go on your phone, you're going to see some great format improvements in that scheduler. And the third thing I want to highlight here is we'll have more payment options. So right now, I think candidates are used to needing to purchase that seat credit ahead of time, kind of have that stored in their record, and then use that seat credit to actually schedule their exam. You'll still have the opportunity to do that, but once we move to PSI, you'll also be able to pay for your exam seat at the time that you actually schedule it. So if you're someone who really you just want to pay it at that moment that you schedule, when you know that you have the date and time that you want, you will be able to do that once we move to PSI.
So some other enhancements that are coming from a policy perspective and from a systems perspective relate to rescheduling. We know some of our candidates run into situations where they just need to reschedule. And under their current policies, there are some limitations in that you have to reschedule within 4 business days. Otherwise, you basically lose your exam fee. And so we've worked with PSI to change the way that's going to be implemented in the system. So you're going to find more flexibility when it comes time to reschedule. So we hope you appreciate that. We're also looking at adding a cancellation option. We've never had that before with the ARE, and it was sort of like once you locked in, you were kind of stuck, honestly. And now it's like we know there are sometimes extreme cases where you really just need to cancel your appointment, right? And so we've been able to work with PSI to build that as an option for you inside of the system. So you're going to learn more about this as we get into the fall timeframe to really understand the policies, but what you're going to see is more flexibility, which is what really matters to you.
Once you actually get to your exam, you're going to see a simplified process for actually launching your online proctored exam and going through that online check-in process. You'll be able to launch your exam right from your NCARB record, so no more digging for that appointment confirmation email that you had gotten a few days before. That will be a really streamlined process there. And then the check-in process itself, as we mentioned, a couple slides ago, there's going to be some similar aspects to the check-in process, but the way the proctors work at PSI in terms of how they're going to be working with our candidates, you're going to see a streamlined process there in terms of waiting for your proctor, meeting with your proctor, going through that check-in process is really going to simplify, how you actually get into your online exam. On a related note there, one thing that we really appreciate with PSI is they're going to have a dedicated team of proctors just for ARE candidates. And they're also going to have dedicated technical support for ARE candidates. So what we hope that means is going to be less waiting for you as a candidate for an online proctor, because you'll be part of that dedicated team with PSI. And if you need technical support, we know that happens to some candidates. You're following the directions, you're trying to log on, and it's just not connecting to that secure browser. There's going to be a dedicated 800 number for you to contact PSI technical support. They'll know all the ins and outs of our program, and they'll be able to help you work through, whatever that technical challenge is. And the last thing to highlight here is once we start testing with PSI, you're going to see more feedback on the failing score reports. So, and that's thinking about the page 2 of the score report that shows that descriptive feedback. We've been able to work with our psychometricians and enhance what we're able to provide there. And so we'll be providing more information to all of you about that later this year, but just know that that additional feedback is going to be coming.
So Michelle and I went over a lot of enhancements, and I think that's the thing that honestly NCARB is excited about. Like, we wanted to make this migration happen because we want to find improvements for you as a candidate, and that includes improvements during the testing experience, right? That over not only just scheduling and dealing with the rescheduling policies and things like that, but while you're testing to make it a better experience. At the same time, we want to point out some key things that are staying the same with PSI, so that you don't have to change the way you're preparing to take the ARE. This is a migration from one administration vendor to another. This is not a transition where we are looking at changing the content. We are not looking at changing the size of the exam. We're not doing any changes to our item types. We're not going to change the structure. It's still going to be the discrete items first with the option to view case studies first if you want to, but the 2 case studies will always come at the end. And we think that's very critical. We know it was disruptive when we had to make changes to move to an online testing format, right? And we did that in response to the pandemic, and it allowed 30% of our candidates to be taking advantage of online testing. This migration isn't that. This migration is about doing what we're doing today. It's the exact same exam. There's going to be no change to the cut score. We're not going to be holding score reports back. None of that's going to take place. It really is just taking what we do today from an exam perspective and moving it over to PSI. And again, we're keeping the opportunities to test in person and or online. So the exam itself isn't changing from a delivery perspective. It's the same. You're going to see the same interface when you sit down to test. It's the same break policies are going to be in place. It's all of that. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean we're not going to be making some improvements to the tool sets. Our goal is still to continue to continuously enhance, over time, all of the tools that are built into the exam. But the basic functionality of the ARE that's today is going to exist with PSI. If we can roll out more enhancements inside of that test delivery engine, we will do that before we launch with PSI, or more will come after.
Another thing that's going to stay the same with PSI is our ability to provide reasonable accommodations during testing. So some of you watching this today might actually already have approved accommodations for your testing. Know that once we migrate to PSI, there is nothing that you will need to do to keep your approved accommodations. Those will automatically be migrated along with your testing eligibility, so that you will still be able to have those same accommodations in PSI as you currently do with Prometric. If you are interested in applying for accommodations, there's information about that on our website, or you can contact our customer service team. But know that the process of applying for accommodations is going to remain the same when we move to PSI. And again, we'll still be able to offer the reasonable accommodations to candidates who need them. We'll also continue to provide provisional feedback at the end of the exam. So some of you might be familiar with when you finish your exam, there's a couple closing screens, and then there's that opportunity to see how did you do today? That provisional feedback. We'll still be providing that with PSI, just as you're used to. And then finally, exam policies, the 5-year rolling clock policy and the 60-day retest policy for retaking a failed division. Those will remain the same when we move to PSI.
So we will be updating some resources. I mean, we know there are some changes, like I mentioned, we're going to add more flexibility around rescheduling. The way you schedule changes a little bit. So NCARB is already planning. We will be updating the ARE 5.0 guidelines. You can expect to see these within the next couple of months. First of all, I would like to thank every candidate who has tested in the last several months and completed the post-exam survey that we sent you. We do read your survey responses. We listen to you. And actually, some of the comments we've gotten back from candidates have driven changes to what you're going to see in the new guidelines. Today, we have the guidelines and we have the handbook. And Michelle had mentioned, right, like we're going to enhance the demonstration exam and we're going to move all of that information about response rationales and understanding how to answer questions into the demonstration exam. So it's more about taking the demo exam, practicing the tools, but also getting feedback on testing. That's going to allow us to simplify and get rid of the handbook as a document. And we're going to move everything into the guidelines. So you'll have one resource that you'll be able to go to for everything related to the ARE. So we do think you'll find the new guidelines when we roll it out to be kind of a one-stop shop, give you all of the information and not have you go looking in different places, because we've gotten that feedback from candidates. The other thing we're doing is we're updating our video series. As we make changes to the exam, we'll make sure we update our video series to reflect any of the new changes that are taking place. The videos are always a great start for any candidate who's just getting going in the ARE process. If you haven't watched them and you're early in your testing process, I would suggest check out our YouTube channel. Watch the video for each division. It gives you a nice high-level overview of what to expect on the test. And then from there, jump into your preparation to get ready to actually test.
Great, a couple other updates to mention here. Again, the enhancements to the demo exam, we've covered that a couple times here. You'll be able to see that later this fall. It's available to all candidates. And then looking ahead next summer, we're actually going to be rolling out full-length practice exams for each division. So speaking of that post-exam survey, we have also heard candidate requests for having practice exams for each division rather than just the one overall demo exam that we have right now. So that is currently in development. So stay tuned. Summer 2022, we expect to be rolling those out.
So Michelle and I covered a lot. We know that. We live this every day. And so we want to make sure that we take the time to slow down a little bit right here and just kind of do a recap and talk about one of the key things that was mentioned earlier. And that is, so right now, like I said, we're going into user acceptance testing, and that is our month of October. But October also is an important month for us to communicate to you. So you're going to be getting a lot more information about like, where are the PSI test centers in your jurisdiction? So we're going to be putting information out about that. The other thing we're going to be doing in October is we're going to be opening up a recruitment opportunity for active ARE candidates that have their eligibilities to engage in what we call the operational pilot. And NCARB has not done an operational pilot in several decades. So what an operational pilot is that as we're building out this new version of PSI, we're going to be ready to deliver in PSI much sooner than the 3-month notice that we're going to give you. Our plan is sometime in likely the December, maybe the January timeframe, we're going to be asking ARE candidates to volunteer to go in and take a full division of the ARE, and you're going to get to pick the division you want to test on. We're not going to make you take practice management if you don't want to take practice management. And the opportunity for you is that as a candidate, this will be free to you to take the ARE with PSI. What we're going to ask in return is that then you're going to give us feedback on how was your check-in experience? How did the overall exam go? Were there any problems with it? Did you experience issues? Our goal is to have anywhere from 300 to 400 candidates over a couple-week period go in and really test this system out. We will have already done all the testing on our end. We're going to be confident that it's working. We want you to give us that user experience of what do you like, what don't you like. It gives us the opportunity as an organization to make some final tweaks before we launch with all of our candidates in that 2022 timeframe. So please look for an invitation in October to volunteer to be part of the operational pilot. We are going to be doing it both online and in person. So we'll be asking, are you interested in one modality or the other? Maybe some candidates will even be interested in taking 2 exams, and they could do one in each modality and give us some compare and contrast. I will say we are limiting this to 300 to 400 candidates. And our goal is to have candidates that participate all across NCARB jurisdictions. Because I'm sure we love our New York candidates, but we don't want to do all of the operational testing in New York, because then that's really not fair, because we're not getting good feedback from California and Texas and Missouri and Kansas and Minnesota and all around the country. So our goal is to recruit a large pool. We will then, based on the division you're interested in taking, based on your location, we'll distribute these 300 to 400 administrations across the country. We hope you're interested in doing this. If you are, watch for it in the communications, and then volunteer. That actually brings us to the end of our presentation, Jenny. So I think we're ready to come back and answer questions that may be outstanding.
All right, thank you so much for that information, Jared and Michelle. So viewers, remember, you can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A tool. We've already gotten a lot of great questions. So to kick things off, our first question. NCARB originally said that we would be transitioning or migrating to PSI in summer 2021. Obviously, we pushed that timeline back. Can you talk a little bit about why?
Certainly. It is about making sure that the systems that we want developed to make your experience better are in place. When we originally signed with PSI and we looked at the schedule, we were thinking it could be this summer that we would be doing it. And then as we dug into the systems and the integration and the opportunities and options that we want for you, it was simply going to take longer to do the work. And so we had a couple of benefits. One, we have the benefit of working with Prometric that was very flexible and willing to say, yes, we're going to continue to support you. We'll keep delivering, the ARE. And so we've been doing that. And then at the same time, it allowed us to build the better systems for the migration to PSI.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, if I haven't started testing yet, should I wait until the migration to PSI to start testing?
Well, I can take that one. I would say if you're ready to start testing, go ahead and start testing. As Jared mentioned, the exam content isn't changing. The format, the structure of the exam isn't changing. So it's not like you have to sort of relearn the exam after we move to PSI. So, as Jared mentioned, February 2022 is the earliest that we're going to be able to turn on testing. So that's a ways away. And over the next 4 to 5 months, you might be able to get a couple divisions under your belt and just be that much further along the process. So I would certainly recommend just start now with Prometric if you're ready to, rather than waiting for the PSI.
Okay, our next question. Is NCARB going to offer an extension to the 5-year rolling clock for candidates who migrate to PSI?
So we're not anticipating any rolling clock extensions related to the migration because we really don't see the migration impacting candidates' ability to test. That's part of the reason we're building the systems the way we are, which will allow the candidates who want to, even 2 months before we start delivering a PSI, start scheduling with PSI. So they can plan ahead. The candidates who want to continue testing with Prometric up through the end of January can do that, and then they can start scheduling with PSI after that. There will likely be a few days between when the last exam is delivered at Prometric and the first exam is delivered at PSI, but it is only going to be a few days. We have to do that basically to do some data cleanup between the different vendors. But again, it's not significant enough to impact somebody's rolling clock. Now, if you are somebody and you're coming up on your rolling clock, that's what NCARB customer service is here for. So reach out to customer service at any time and have that conversation about, what's going on in your life. You may qualify for a rolling clock extension right now and may not even know it. So, that's good to have the conversation if you're pushing up on that 5-year.
All right, our next question, and a couple of candidates have asked questions about this. If they have purchased seat credits already through the current scheduler, will those seat credits transition to PSI if they haven't used them to schedule a test?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a really key thing for candidates to know, is that you're not going to lose any seat credits that are still in your record when we migrate to PSI. If you've applied a seat credit to an appointment that you've scheduled with Prometric, keep in mind that appointment is not going to migrate to PSI. You will need to take any scheduled appointments with Prometric, but any seat credits that you have that you would purchase in advance that you haven't used yet, those will continue with you into the PSI testing system.
Great news. So does PSI have better equipment, or will the computers crash less, or will the graphics be more viewable to candidates?
So I guess the way to answer it is, this is a complicated answer because partly NCARB is starting to make changes inside of the exam to address delivery issues as well as usability of the exam itself. And so I, again, will thank everybody who has ever volunteered for NCARB and served on one of our item writing committees, because honestly, the ARE doesn't exist if not for literally over 100 architect volunteers every single year that come in and do the work of writing items, editing items, doing the quality control assurance. And what we've been doing is we've been actually going through another round of quality control assurance to modify items to make sure that they fit better on the screen, to make sure that they're more viewable for you as the candidate. At the same time, we've been doing system improvements to improve the delivery of the software in the center. The technical, as I said, this is a complicated answer. The technical answer on this from a software perspective is, when you sit down at a test center or when you launch your online exam, you're really launching what we call a wrapper application. So it's one piece of software that is kind of locking down the computer. And then that piece of software is talking to the test driver. And so what happens is we're working on improvements partly between the wrapper applications to make sure that you as a candidate get a better experience. And we're going to continue to actually reinforce, especially for our online testers, how important it is to have a good, stable internet connection, because Prometric does a great job of tracking data on this for us. And the reality is the amount of candidates that are experiencing technical issues with online is so much greater than people in the test center. And it's not from the wrapper or the test delivery software. It's slight interruptions in internet connectivity are causing the exam to halt, which is unfortunate because it forces you as a candidate to have to log out and log back in and restart. So we're also working on ways we can try to minimize those disruptions for you as a candidate. But I cannot stress enough how important it is that firewalls are turned off, antivirus software is turned off, and that you maintain a good, stable bandwidth connection while taking an online test.
Okay, speaking of online testing, does NCARB expect the online testing process to be more user-friendly when we change to PSI? I think they're specifically wondering if we're going to require less specific equipment like the webcam and external monitor.
Well, I can answer some of that, Jenny. And answering the last part of what you asked about the specific equipment, candidates will still be required to have an external webcam, and we're still going to recommend a minimum size for the monitor. As Jared had mentioned, we are taking some quality control measures in our item bank right now to just ensure how items are viewable on the screen. And so we're kind of factor that in when we talk, more specifically about, monitor sizes, as we get closer to launch. But as of now, we do expect that candidates are going to still need to provide some specific equipment. And in fact, Jared was mentioning that PSI developed a web page for our candidates, and we linked to that in our last ARE update. So you want to navigate to that page. I think it's also linked in the blog, the latest blog on our website. And you can learn more about the specific equipment requirements that we currently anticipate for online testing. Now, as far as it being just sort of overall an easier process, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. PSI is going to have a dedicated proctor group for our candidates. And so what that means is, I should say right now, when you're testing online and you go to check in for your test, and then you're in that queue waiting for a proctor, you're waiting for a proctor along with every other candidate for every other test that Prometric currently delivers. So it's not just ARE candidates, it's all of the candidates who are testing online with Prometric. Once we move to PSI, PSI is going to have a group of proctors that are just dedicated to ARE candidates. So we're pretty happy about that. We feel that that is going to certainly streamline that process, hopefully reduce that queue for candidates who feel like you're just waiting for the proctor so you can just get started with your exam. It also means that those proctors are going to be super familiar inside and out with all of our policies, because they're not going to also be focusing on policies for other exams that are being delivered online. They're really going to be dedicated to the ARE and knowing all the ins and outs of what you'll need to know as a candidate and how you'll need to get through your testing. And then I also had mentioned earlier, we're going to have that dedicated technical support phone number as well for ARE candidates. So PSI will be providing that service for us. And so what that means is if you do have a technical challenge during testing, something that your proctor isn't able to help you fix, it becomes a more difficult issue, you'll have that phone number, again, staffed by dedicated proctor help desk to help you resolve any technical challenges during your online testing.
Okay, our next question is not actually about the PSI migration, but it is about the exam. Can you talk a little bit about the recent issue with the exam calculator and what NCARB is doing about it?
Certainly. So this was a very unfortunate issue, and we apologize for the inconvenience. What ended up happening was we had a new calculator developed, which we thought would improve the candidate experience. And it was to build in a history function so you could see the history of all of your calculations, as well as allow you to store multiple things in the memory. So the calculator was developed, it went through testing, and what happened is after the calculator was turned on, it was discovered that, now I will again nerd out a little bit on technical, the floating variable point aspect of the programming of the calculator caused the calculator to do anomalies in rounding at the third decimal place. And so what that meant was like the 0.00 something number sometimes would round in an odd way, in an inappropriate way. And so we went back, and once that was discovered, we immediately reverted back to the traditional calculator on the exam to make sure that no candidate experiences, an incorrect calculation. The other thing we did is the new calculator had been on and active for candidates for a period of 3 days. And so NCARB wanted to assure that no candidate was negatively impacted by that calculator. And we actually went back and researched every candidate exam that took place during that window. And we evaluated how the candidate did. We looked at the items on the exam that the candidate was exposed to. We went back and recalculated how the candidate calculated the answer. And what we were able to confirm is that, again, luckily, because it was at that third decimal place and the way we do scoring on a lot of our quantitative items, there was no impact of the calculator error that took place on screen. Again, we apologize for it. Our vendor is quite sorry that this happened. They're not pleased with this either. They understand the importance of a solid, stable tool set for you all. We understand the importance of a solid, stable tool set for you all as candidates. And the time on that is we can't tell you right now when we're going to be able to turn back on the history version of the calculator, because our vendor is going through some re-engineering and they are looking at how to quality control check to make sure that this floating point variable issue does not rise again.
Thank you. All right, back to the PSI migration. Once NCARB changes to PSI, will there still be fees for rescheduling exams?
So at this time, what I will say from a fees perspective on rescheduling is NCARB made the choice, our board of directors several months ago, to have no fee for rescheduling from an NCARB perspective, and that what you pay to reschedule is what we have to pay our vendor to reschedule. I will at this point just say, I think you can expect some good news in how rescheduling is going to work in the future around the fees, because again, NCARB is committed to not passing on any additional fee to you when it comes to rescheduling. Any cost savings we see, you are going to see. And at this point, that's all I can say, but I think you'll be happy.
Another fees question that you'll probably have a vague answer for. Does NCARB expect test costs to increase with the change to PSI?
Oh, Jenny, so you want another vague answer? So again, I'll give you an honest answer. NCARB is really seriously, like, we are focused on trying to keep the cost of this exam down. We understand it. Again, we hear from our candidates. We did a study recently, the joint study based on belonging with the National Organization of Minority Architects. And honestly, we were shocked by some of the data that came back on how much candidates are spending on the exam overall, on test prep to get ready for the exam. And so again, I will commend our board of directors that are having really serious conversations about how to keep cost controls for you as a candidate on the ARE. And again, I will give you a vague answer and then I can't tell you exactly what it's going to be. But again, I will say NCARB is committed to this issue. We're going to keep listening. And honestly, that's part of the reason we're doing the practice exams coming out next summer. Again, we want to continue to provide more information and more resources to you as an organization to lower your financial burden of going through the licensure process.
Okay, thanks. Our next question, will PSI add additional test centers? NCARB has said that there'll be more test centers with PSI, but a lot of candidates are noticing they seem to be grouped around cities, or they're just not seeing any near them show up when they search.
So I can answer that one. I think first thing I'll jump in there and say is that candidates are not going to be able to see the test centers at which the ARE will be delivered yet, because that's not going to be provided to you on the PSI website. Typically, when you look for a test center on the PSI website, you kind of need to know what is your exam vendor that you're testing with, because not every test center delivers every test. So I will advise candidates to just wait a little bit longer. I think Jared had mentioned this, when we start recruiting for that operational pilot next month, we are also going to be able to provide you with the list of test centers that we anticipate delivering with, starting in February, but also for that operational pilot. So that will help you as a candidate know, like, do I want to volunteer for the operational pilot, based on the test centers, near where I'm living. That being said, the other thing that I want to say, as far as, the comment that test centers seem to be kind of grouped near sort of central locations, I think that's what the question was, Jenny. We've actually done some comparisons of our test center network today, the test center network with PSI. And what we found is in many of our jurisdictions, test centers are actually more scattered with PSI than they are currently. And so I think, especially if you're not living in a city and you are in a suburban location or farther out from a city, I think you're going to see more options with your test centers. But again, we'll be providing more detailed information on that in the October timeframe is what we're expecting. And I think there was one more point there about adding test centers. So that's going to be part of just an ongoing discussion with PSI. After we launch with them, we'll certainly be keeping an eye on volume of candidates testing at various locations. And I know that's something that PSI will be willing to really work with us on and address if we're seeing that certain locations are just, there's longer wait times to get appointments, or we're just hearing from candidates, about difficulties finding a test center near them. That's certainly something that we can address moving forward with PSI to make sure that we're serving all of our candidates. So,
and I'll add a couple things. I've been cautioning people for several months. If you just go to Google and go to Google Maps and type PSI test center, you're not going to see all the locations where the ARE is going to be delivered. PSI has their own proprietary network of test centers. They also deliver exams through technology that allows them into other test centers that will then fall under the PSI family of test centers. And so that's why Michelle's saying the full list isn't going to be available until a little bit later, because what we're also working on are identifying the test centers that can maybe be upgraded between now and the launch that would allow us to deliver the ARE to you in even more locations. So that's I think an important part. Like, Google Maps is not your friend when it comes to searching for your local PSI test center. I'll just point that out.
All right, thank you for that information. So has NCARB done any research into bringing back paper and pencil scratch paper? A lot of candidates find it really difficult to write out equations and do math using the whiteboard.
And so we continue to, I would say we've looked at the issue. We continue to discuss the issue. The reality is NCARB is not planning to bring back scratch paper. It's not going to happen. The reality is eliminating scratch paper both in test centers and for online testing enhance the overall security of the exam. And that's what we really do care about at NCARB. So we launched the digital whiteboard. We made enhancements to the digital whiteboard. We'll probably continue to make enhancements to the digital whiteboard. Yes, we tried to make enhancements to the calculator. Unfortunately, that didn't work out the way we wanted, but we're committed to getting it done right and getting it back out there for you. And at the same time, I will point out back to our volunteers who quality control all of these items. Like they make sure that they can solve every item that you're going to see using the exact same tools that you see before you ever see that item. So moving forward, no, scratch paper is gone. Paper and pencil in the test center for NCARB is gone. And it's about using the tools available to demonstrate your knowledge to get your license.
All right, and a follow-up question for that. You mentioned enhancements to the whiteboard. Is NCARB considering including the option to use like an electronic pen or tablet to write on the whiteboard?
We have looked at that, and I think we can continue to do that. Again, I will say, keep giving us feedback on those surveys. We really do read it and listen to it. That is something from a technology perspective we can continue to test. I know there was a lot of talk about that when we first switched to the digital whiteboard, and unfortunately, it was something that a lot of test centers and test vendors actually cannot support. If it is something that can be supported, we'll absolutely could allow that, because again, from a security perspective, if everything's contained on the screen, we're in a happy place. It's about once you take something off the screen that it creates a risk that we're not comfortable with.
Okay, next question. Will candidates, we mentioned the option earlier for canceling exams. If candidates cancel an exam, will they get a seat credit or a refund back when they do that cancellation?
So if a candidate cancels an exam, they will get that seat credit. As Jared sort of vaguely alluded to when we were talking about some fee questions earlier, more information about that policy is going to be released later this year. But again, I think the main thing for candidates to focus on now is that there will be an option to cancel your exam when you just feel like, I don't have time right now to deal with rescheduling it. I just need to cancel and kind of deal with this later. That option will be there for you.
And to be less vague, I will say, yes, there is going to be a fee involved in canceling an appointment, but you will get your seat credit back. And it is going to be a much better deal to say, oh, I'm going to just cancel this appointment and get that seat credit than it would be to simply be a no-show and lose your entire exam fee.
Okay. Will pilot testing be free?
Yes, the idea is, so the operational pilot will be free to candidates. And I guess one thing I didn't state, but I want to make sure you understand is, it's a full live exam. Like it 100% counts. So if you participate in the operational pilot, this isn't like a practice exam. This is the full ARE. And if you go in and pass, you pass. The score report goes to your jurisdictional licensing board. It counts towards your license. So this really is, if you're currently a tester and you were thinking about taking a division in that December, January timeframe, being part of the operational pilot is maybe a really good opportunity for you.
Okay, well, that answers what my next question was. So moving on to the next question, can NCARB add a general comments field to the post-exam survey?
We could, sure. I mean, we have flexibility.
Yeah, and we will still have that post-exam survey once we move to PSI, just as we do today. You'll still get that in your email. I think it's 1 to 2 days after you test is when you receive that. And definitely, we control what that survey is, and we can certainly take that feedback and be able to include that in the future.
Okay. Our next question, we've talked a little bit about full-length practice exam for each division. When are those exams being launched?
So the plan, again, is thank you, volunteers. Our volunteers are writing those practice exams right now. And so based on the current volunteer schedule and workload, because we don't want to overwork them, is we expect to launch the full-size practice exam for each division next summer. Is our goal. So it is several months away. We understand that, but we do think it's important that you understand these are coming. They will be fully scored. It will be a form assembled just like you're going to see in the test center. You'll get feedback on your performance across the various sections of the exam.
Okay. Why does the online exam software require turning off firewalls and antivirus programs when very few other programs have issues with those?
I will say I am not an IS person. I remember I was schooled as an architect. I did not get into a lot of technology courses. All I know is this is what we're hearing from our technology partners is that some antivirus softwares, when you're live, because your camera is streaming, right, and your audio is live during the whole time you're taking an online exam. The other thing that is happening is that your exam is communicating at an encrypted level. And so it's factors like that certain antivirus softwares will shut down an application for, because what your antivirus software starts to think is there's a virus on your machine and it's taking your content and it's delivering it and it's like locking it into an encrypted file like ransomware, and it's sending it off to some other location. And that is a flag to some antivirus softwares. I will actually share, I personally use a file sharing application that encrypts my files that I save up to the cloud. And NCARB's antivirus software locked me out of my software one day. I was like, what happened? I can't save my files anymore. And it was because the antivirus software was like, oh, something's encrypting files on your computer and it's sending them off. And so it shut it down. And so I had to work with NCARB's IS team for several days to resolve this issue. And I think that same thing is happening to some candidates based on the antivirus software you're using.
And I'll just add there, we spoke earlier about all of the internal testing that NCARB is going to be doing in October. I mean, thinking back to about a year ago, it was part of our internal testing when we discovered, some of these challenges with antivirus software, because those of us at NCARB who were testing our online proctoring application before we launched it last fall realized, oh, wait, there's something here that's blocking this from working. And so again, it was that sort of, user testing that we were doing internally that really helped guide a lot of the guidance that, we are providing to candidates about how to make sure that you have a good online testing experience. It was just that same thing of Jared and I and others on our team realized, oh wait, there's more that's going on than we had first anticipated. We were able to kind of troubleshoot some of that internally, and then be able to provide that information to you as well.
Okay, so we do have just 5 minutes left, so we're going to try to get through a couple more questions before we wrap up. Okay, can NCARB address whether PSI is going to be spacing candidates in person to comply with CDC guidance around social distancing?
So at this time, PSI is complying with CDC guidelines. We would expect that they would be into the February timeframe, and of course, we certainly hope that we don't have to worry about CDC guidelines in the February time.
Great.
I'll just piggyback onto that right now, that actually, if you go onto that webpage, again, that we've talked about, that PSI, the testing with PSI webpage that, we've linked to in our blog, there's actually a link there to PSI's COVID-19 response page. So if you are interested in more details on how PSI is, dealing with specifics in test centers, that again is linked in that webpage that we've provided for you.
Okay, our next question is, can candidates take more than one division through the pilot testing?
Possibly. Honestly, we will try to disperse the opportunity to be part of the operational pilot to more candidates, but there may be a select few that can take multiple divisions.
And then our last question before we wrap up is, how is NCARB going to pick people for the pilot testing?
So our plan is we're going to reach out to you and ask you if you're interested in participating and what divisions you're interested in participating in, whether you want to test on site in a certain region of the country or whether you want to test online. And you might be able to say, I'm willing to do all of it, right? And that's great. Then what we're going to do is, based on the responses that come back, we're going to look to create this geographically diverse population of candidates that can do the testing in multiple jurisdictions around the country. So it's a combination of factors that's going to lead to the broadest amount of testing that will be the most beneficial to the entire candidate pool.
Okay, thank you. And before we close, can each of you share one quick key takeaway that you want viewers to remember from today's webinar?
I think that the takeaway is just keep paying attention to all the information that we're going to be releasing over the coming months. You know, we mentioned a lot of things rolling out this fall, a lot of information through emails, on our blog, through various videos. So just keep an eye out for all of that stuff. We're going to be providing all that information to you, and just be ready to take it all in.
I guess my key takeaway would be, try not to worry about the migration to PSI. And genuinely, I say that. Let Michelle and I and everybody who works at NCARB worry about the migration to PSI for you. That's what we're here to do. We're here to make sure it works. We're here to test it. We're here to do all those kind of things. So that way for you, it is about, I'm studying for the ARE. I'm just going to keep studying for the ARE, and I'm going to go past this thing. And so I think if you can walk away from here knowing that, I think we're in a better place. We will keep sharing information. I know we're going to do more of these NCARB lives over the next few months. I look forward to them, because the more you know, the better prepared you're going to be. But let us worry. You don't have to worry about it.
Okay, viewers, thank you so much for joining us for today's NCARB Live. As Michelle and Jared mentioned, we're going to be releasing a lot of information. So go to ncarb.org/subscribe and make sure that you are signed up to receive our ARE updates, so that all of those future information dumps will be in your inbox. And if we did not answer your question today, you can leave it in the comment section on YouTube. You can contact our customer relations team, or you can go to the online community for more information. And we'll see you next time.